Scandal's Mirror was first promoted, there were some rather interesting vibes from the get-go, whether it be the string of mid-tempo poppy-leaning singles, or if it was the album cover which when it came out looked more like they were trying to promote a fragrance or a perfume or something. It certainly was kind of different in a way that I must admit kind of appealed to someone like me who likes a lot of variation in what bands do and doesn't mind a bit of pop, but maybe was a little bit concerning for someone who was more of a traditional rock band, Scandal type fan of the more formative years. It seemed though that everyone was willing to give it a chance. So the two questions we're left with now is it really very different from the Scandal that we know and love, and does it actually work? Well, that's probably going to be kind of a subjective one, because there is a lot of good and bad to be said about this album, but whether you like it I think is going to be somewhat down to whether you like where the variation appears in Mirror and where it doesn't. See, this album does have quite a bit of variation, but it's not really in the tempo or the energy of the songs so much. Mirror feels like an album that's something more of a string of pleasant soundscapes and melodies for you to vibe to, rather than what you'd expect from a band who usually produces very, very varied albums which have often more than a couple of really hard-rocking songs on them as well. See, for example, Saishu Heiki Kimi and AMDKJ, which were both on the rather pop-leaning Kiss from the Darkness that came out prior to this album. You're not going to get any of that here. In fact, I actually came away from Mirror feeling that Eternal and One More Time were probably amongst the most pumped up and kinetic of the songs on the album, which is rather surprising considering when I reviewed them individually before, I commented a lot about their respective ballad and chilled out pop-like qualities. This chilled out vibe though isn't a deal breaker. See, an album doesn't have to have hard rock songs on it to be good. It doesn't have to remind you of what came before to be worth listening to. It's just worth noting that that is a part of Scandal's sound, one that many might think is a signature part of their sound, which is missing here. It is fair to say that in some places Mirror feels like it's hinting at a more energetic vibe. One of the songs in particular, Kanojo Wild Wave, has a slightly dancey feel to it, but there's so much of a soundscape vibe on it, there's so much of a sparse, echoey feel, and even the lyrics are very sparse and separated out, that despite having a thumping beat, that all just kind of disappears into the wash of sound, and what has on paper a bit of a dancey vibe ends up being something much more soundscapey. Kanojo Wild Wave is an interesting and transportative song that does, take you into its little world. However, it's a sort of song that slips by more like a mood or a feeling that you can wash over yourself with, rather than something that sticks with you more long-term, catches in your brain like an earworm, or, to be honest, makes you want to get out of your chair and dance. So if Mirror isn't trying to make you rock out or dance, what is it doing in that place? And how well does it do it? Well, this kind of goes back to me retelling what I said earlier, in that it is very much an album of melodies and sounds. And this is where some of the experimentation and variation actually really starts to come across to you. I mean, like I mentioned, we have some of those more electronic produced songs with a lot of effects on them. But we also have songs like Ai no Shotai, which is a really fun little dabble with more raw sounds, putting in some brass and some gospel in the background of a really kind of catchy little song that has some of Tomomi's beautifully high-pitched vocals, also giving a bit of variation in there. Well, I've got to assume it's Tomomi. I didn't check that, but that quality of high-pitched squeak can only come from Tomomi, surely. Then we have songs like Yugure Tokeru, which plays with some really deep, creamy, thick bass lines, which is all going underneath a very trippy, fast-moving and experimental drum beat from Rina. And that song also plays a lot with the reverb effects that I think Scandal clearly do quite adore of this part of their career. Once again, you've got Eternal, which plays beautifully with mixing some really delicate sounds and then throwing in some big impact sounds in the beat and in the chorus especially. And of course, One More Time, which as I've mentioned is like a very cool modern pop classic really, a real sing-along good happy vibe song. However, the album struggles a little bit more when it gets towards the few songs that are not so sonically experimental. There are some songs that just kind of have a stripped back, strummy vibe, and I'm kind of thinking mostly of tracks like Mirror and Ivory. Now, this is not to say that this is necessarily a bad thing. I'm sure we can all think of some real classic, famous songs from the history of pop and rock, which could basically just be performed to thunderous applause with only a strummed guitar and a memorable vocal line. I must admit though, that to me wasn't so much the case for Mirror and Ivory, especially where the stripped back feel, if anything, more just highlighted that those songs were not as catchy as other songs like Ai no Shotai or One More Time, which we even gave a channel award to for its catchiness. And this is not to say these songs are bad, because they're actually not. When you're listening to them, they're pretty good. The only thing is that for a band who have so many memorable and varied and creatively inventive songs in their back catalogue, these just don't give you anything to really latch onto. There's nothing about them that stands out and separates them. They are, despite being singles, almost the classic idea of what an album track is. And thus, when you listen to them on the album, they're pleasant, they slide by, but they do slide by. They don't really stay with you. Now, while I am taking a little dive into making some critical comments about the album, before I kind of steer it round, I must just highlight one song, which is, it's a long name, Ao no Naru Yoru no Suki Made, or track 8, for basically being the one song on this album that I would actively skip. It doesn't bring any of the traditional creativity from Scandal, but worse still, doesn't manage to be even that melodically interesting like songs like Ivory and Mirror admittedly are. I have no idea how this plodding, rather dull, mid-tempo song even made it onto the album. I mean, it really feels like Mami, Rina, Tomomi, it feels like they've been told to ration any effort being put into this song. It's just really dull. If One More Time is an example, as are several songs on this album, of how to do something simple but then make the end result just so much more than the sum of its parts, this song is an example of how to do something simple and somehow have it sound worse. Anyway, sorry, I just had to mention that because this is the one song on the album that stands out to me as actually being a problem. Because as I say, this album is basically one that it's very easy to listen to from cover to cover. It's not got anything really bad about it. And a big part of that is melody. See, with exceptions of that song and also Kanojo wa Wave, which, as I pointed out, isn't really so much going for a normal vocal melody line. It's kind of going into more of a dance soundscape space. Otherwise, this album is absolutely full of really interesting melodies. Or even if you don't find them particularly interesting, the one thing I must point out is after multiple listens, I didn't find any of the melodies had become tiresome or repetitive, and that's actually a very difficult thing to do if you think about it. I mean, it's amazing how easy it is to listen to such a simple album repeatedly without getting bored of any of the melodies. Just, as I pointed out, a beautiful cover-to-cover listen almost every time. And okay, so maybe not all of these songs have melodies that are going to be timeless, but that is a really difficult thing to do, and this album does manage to deliver at least 3 really good earworm melodies, as I pointed out, in Eternal, Ai no Shotai, and One More Time. And one dud in the song I previously mentioned. But one's not many. Therefore, despite a more lethargic tone and some songs that I feel are too stripped back to really stick in the memory, it must be said that Mirror is a very easy, atmospheric, pleasant listen. It doesn't take you on a wild journey so much as it just sets a nice mood and chills out with you for a bit. It has enough different sounds in there and enough quality melody and songwriting to basically stop it becoming repetitive or boring, and at the same time managed to kick out some really good singles that have only grown on me with time, even if they're not ones that many people would consider to be standard Scandal singles. Not that you can really say there is a standard Scandal single, but there wasn't any rockers in there, I admit. Mirror is different from Scandal's previous albums as well, which I consider to show that Scandal's typical braveness with their new output is still there. They're still being ambitious about what they do. Very often we don't kind of associate more chilled out songs or more stripped back music with being something brave or ambitious. But considering that this is, as I say, different from a lot of what they've done before and stands the risk of alienating fans, and I can only assume they've gone for this sound because it's something they really wanted to dabble with, that is brave. Was it a success? Well, time and personal opinion will be the judge of that, but I certainly don't think anyone could say this album was a failure. And it's one that I'm going to enjoy having around. I'm sure there'll be certain evenings where I'll just be in the mood to put it on, and it will be the perfect album for that. And it's got some singles that I am certainly going to be playing to death, as I have been since they came out. And frankly, what more can we ask for? So as always, those are my opinions, and I'm looking forward to hearing yours. Get in the comments and tell me. Also, this is a new format for doing the album reviews, so tell me if you've got any opinions. Hopefully you enjoyed it. There will be more following this up. We've got some really overdue album reviews that I've got to pop out, so those will be coming soon. But until I hopefully see you either in the comments or on the next video here in Japan, for now, ciao ciao.